The night carried a chill that seeped into Ethan's bones as he leaned against the railing of his weathered porch. The faint glow of his porch lamp illuminated the chipped paint of the house and the uneven planks beneath his boots. In his hands, a mug of coffee had grown cold, forgotten as he stared into the stillness of his quiet suburban neighborhood. The occasional rustle of wind brushing through the trees was the only sound until something broke the silencia, faint metallic clatter near the trash bins. Ethan straightened, squinting toward the edge of the yard. He could just make out a figure hunched low, its movements slow but purposeful. He frowned, his first thought being that a desperate neighbor or a stray animal had ventured onto his property. Yet, as he stepped closer, the outline of the intruder became clearer. It wasn't a raccoon, nor was it human, not entirely. The figure was a woman, but she seemed otherworldly. Her frame was impossibly slight, her movements sharp yet deliberate, as if every step was measured to conserve energy. Under the dim glow of the porch light, her skin shimmered faintly with a purplish hue, as though her body carried a light of its own. Ethan's breath hitched. His instincts screamed at him to retreat, to shut the door and pretend he hadn't seen her. But something about the way her bony shoulders hunched as she sifted through the trash stopped him. She pulled a half-eaten sandwich from the bin, wiped it against the edge of her tattered sleeve, and raised it to her lips. Ethan stepped forward, the sound of his boots crunching against the gravel drawing her attention. She froze, her luminous, violet eyes snapping toward him. They were large, too large for her angular face, and glistened with an unsettling mixture of intelligence and fear. "Hey," Ethan called softly, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "It's okay, I'm not going to hurt you." The sandwich dropped from her hands, forgotten. Her body remained rigid, her wide eyes locked onto him as though he were a predator preparing to pounce. She seemed poised to bolt, her muscles taut, yet she didn't run. Ethan took another cautious step forward, his voice low and steady. "You don't have to do that. Come inside, I can help." She didn't respond, but her head tilted slightly, her gaze narrowing as though she was trying to decode his words. Up close, Ethan could see her exhaustion. Dirt clung to her cheeks, smeared along her high cheekbones and jawline. Her clothes, if they could be called, that were made of some strange, torn fabric that shimmered faintly under the light. The material hugged her frame, but it was clear it wasn't meant for this world. He gestured toward the house, careful not to move too suddenly. "It's warm inside. There's food. You look like you could use it." Still, she didn't move. Ethan exhaled slowly, lowering his hands. "If you wanted to hurt me, you would have done it by now," he said, his tone dry but not unkind. "So, let's call it even. Come on." Her head tilted again, her expression unreadable. Slowly, with the wariness of a cornered animal, she straightened and took a step toward him. Ethan resisted the urge to retreat as she approached, her alien presence both fascinating and unsettling. She was shorter than he'd realized, her frail frame making her seem impossibly delicate. When she reached the porch, she hesitated, her violet eyes flicking to the door as though unsure if she could trust what lay beyond it. "It's just a house," Ethan said, pushing the door open and stepping aside. "Not a trap." Finally, she crossed the threshold. The warmth of the house washed over her, and her movements slowed. She paused in the entryway, her gaze roaming over the mismatched furniture, the flickering light of the old lamp on the side table, and the faint steam rising from a forgotten mug on the counter. Her nostrils flared slightly as she took in the faint aroma of coffee and wood polish. As Ethan closed the door behind her, he caught a whiff of the smell that clung to her. It was sharp and earthy, with a metallic tang that turned his stomach. He wrinkled his nose before he could stop himself. The woman flinched, her shoulders tensing as though his reaction had been a physical blow. Guilt churned in his chest. "Sorry," he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. It's been a rough journey, huh?" She didn't respond, but her gaze dropped to the floor, her fingers twisting the edge of her tattered sleeve. Ethan cleared his throat. "Look, I don't mean to be rude, but you might want to clean up. There's a bathroom down the hall. I'll find you something clean to wear." Her head lifted, her violet eyes narrowing slightly. It was clear she didn't fully understand his words, but she seemed to grasp his intent. Ethan gestured toward the hallway, taking a step back to give her space. After a long pause, she nodded once and followed his lead. He showed her the bathroom, flipping on the light to reveal the small, dated space. The cracked tiles and faint mildew stains were far from luxurious, but the shower worked. Ethan twisted the knobs, letting warm water cascade into the tub, and mimed washing his arms to demonstrate. "It's not complicated," he said. "Soap's on the shelf. I'll leave some clothes outside." She watched him closely, her gaze darting between his hands and the running water. When he stepped back, she reached out tentatively, letting the water run over her fingers. A flicker of something crossed her face, curiosity perhaps, or even wonder. Ethan shut the door behind him, leaving her to her privacy. He exhaled deeply, running a hand through his hair. What the hell had he gotten himself into? Moving to his bedroom, he dug through his drawers and pulled out an old flannel shirt and a pair of sweatpants. They'd drown her small frame, but they were better than what she had. He set the clothes outside the bathroom door and retreated to the kitchen, where a half-empty pot of soup sat on the stove. He stirred it absently, his thoughts racing. Who was she? Where had she come from? And what had left her scavenging through his trash in the dead of night? The faint sound of running water echoed through the house, a reminder that the answers might be waiting just down the hall. When the bathroom door finally opened, Ethan turned, his breath catching at the sight of her. She stood in the hallway, her damp hair clinging to her neck and shoulders. Clean and draped in his oversized flannel, she looked both vulnerable and otherworldly. Her skin, now free of dirt, gleamed with a soft, iridescent light, the purple hue more pronounced under the warm glow of the hallway lamp. "You look better," Ethan said, his voice softer than he intended. He handed her a bowl of soup, their fingers brushing briefly as she took it. Her eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw something beyond fear in her expression, gratitude perhaps, or the faintest flicker of trust. She sat at the small kitchen table, cradling the bowl in her hands as she sipped carefully. Ethan watched her, the questions swirling in his mind louder than ever. He didn't know who she was or why she was here, but one thing was certain: her arrival had upended the stillness of his world. The bathroom was quiet, except for the steady hiss of running water. Steam curled lazily upward, softening the harsh edges of the cracked tiles and fogging the mirror above the sink. Nia stood in the doorway, her slender frame casting a shadow across the damp floor. She hesitated, her luminous violet eyes fixed on the stream of water cascading from the showerhead. It was both foreign and mesmerizing, a contrast to the dry, crystalline pools of her home world. Her body ached from weeks of wandering, her muscles taut with exhaustion. The fabric of the flannel shirt Ethan had left outside the door hung loosely over her small frame, its texture coarse against her skin. She reached out tentatively, letting the water run over her fingertips. A jolt of warmth raced through her, unfamiliar but not unpleasant. Her people had used water sparingly, treating it as a sacred resource. Here, it flowed freely, its abundance both a marvel and an absurdity. Nia inhaled deeply, the humid air filling her lungs. Her otherworldly skin, a faint lavender that shimmered under light, glistened as the droplets clung to it. The sensation was overwhelming, intense but grounding. She stepped forward, her movements slow, deliberate. Each footfall on the cool tiles was a reminder of her fragility and her resilience. With one final glance toward the closed door, she stepped under the stream. The first burst of water struck her with unexpected force. A sharp gasp escaped her lips, her body instinctively recoiling before the warmth began to seep into her. She stood motionless for a moment, allowing the water to cascade over her, its heat unraveling the tension knotted in her shoulder. Her hair, damp and heavy, clung to her face, framing the sharp contours of her jawline. She reached for the bar of soap Ethan had placed on the ledge, her fingers brushing against its slippery surface. It was alien, its scent sharp and earthy, yet it intrigued her. She mimicked the motions Ethan had demonstrated, rubbing the soap between her hands. Suds formed quickly, their texture almost magical in its lightness. She spread the foam across her arms and shoulders, her movements mechanical at first, but as the grime of weeks washed away, her motions grew slower, more deliberate. Each stroke of her hands revealed more of her lavender skin, its natural iridescence glinting in the light, as if tiny stars were embedded within her flesh. As the soap did its work, so did her mind. Flashes of memory assaulted her homeworld with its twin suns blazing over crystalline plains, her people glowing softly like bioluminescent flora under moonlight. She recalled the cacophony of alarms as the vessel she piloted tore through the atmosphere of this strange planet. Her hands paused mid-scrub as she remembered the moment of impact, the deafening crash that had left her stranded here. Her chest tightened, the phantom ache of the crash returning as her fingers brushed against the jagged scar on her side. The wound had healed, but the memory lingered. The days since then had been a blur of hunger, fear, and solitude. The taste of Earth's air, thick and rich with unfamiliar smells, was something she hadn't yet grown used to. Now, in this moment of warmth and water, she felt for the first time a flicker of something elsey, fragile thread of safety. The water began to cool, its heat dissipating into a lukewarm drizzle. She twisted the knob, mimicking Ethan's earlier demonstration, and stepped out onto the mat. The towel he had left for her was soft, its fabric coarser than the silken garments of her people, but comforting nonetheless. She wrapped it around herself and caught her reflection in the fogged mirror. For a moment, she didn't recognize the figure staring back. The grime and exhaustion that had dulled her features were gone. Her lavender skin gleamed faintly in the low light, the angles of her face sharper, more pronounced. Her large eyes, once clouded by fear, now carried a cautious clarity. She looked less like the feral creature who had rummaged through Ethan's trash and more like the being she had been before the crash. But the difference was undeniable. This was Earth, and she was far from home. The clothes Ethan had provided, a flannel shirt and oversized sweatpants, lay neatly folded on the sink. She slipped them on, their weight foreign but comforting. The shirt hung loose on her frame, the sleeves drooping past her hands. She tugged at the fabric, adjusting it to fit better, and ran her fingers through her damp hair. A knock on the door startled her. "You all right in there?" Ethan's voice was soft, hesitant. Naya hesitated, her hand hovering over the door handle. "Yes," she said finally, her voice quiet but steady. The English words felt strange on her tongue, heavy and awkward. But she had to adapt. It was survival, just like everything else. She opened the door slowly, her eyes meeting Ethan's. He stood a few feet away, holding a steaming bowl of soup. His expression softened as he took her in, clean and clothed. "Looks like the bath did you good," he said, offering her the bowl. "Come on, let's get you something to eat." Naya followed him into the kitchen, her bare feet padding silently against the floor. The warmth of the room, the faint smell of spices and broth, wrapped around her like a blanket. She sat at the small wooden table, cradling the bowl in her hands. Its heat seeped into her fingers as she lifted it, the aroma both strange and enticing. She sipped cautiously, the rich, savory flavors, unlike anything she had tasted before. Food on her planet was functional, efficient, but devoid of pleasure. This was something else entirely. Ethan sat across from her, his gaze curious but not invasive. "So," he began, resting his elbows on the table, "what's your name? You told me earlier, but can you say it again?" "Nia," she said softly, her violet eyes flicking toward him before returning to the bowl. "Naya," he repeated, nodding. "I'm Ethan. You already know that, though." She didn't respond, but her lips curled faintly at the corners. Ethan took it as a sign of progress. "I don't know where you're from," he said carefully, "but it's pretty obvious you're not from here." Her gaze sharpened, but she said nothing. Ethan raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Hey, no pressure. I'm just saying, if you need help, real help, I'll try my best. But I can't do that if I don't know what's going on." She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the bowl. "Far," she said finally. "Very far." "Yeah, I figured," Ethan said, a faint chuckle in his voice. "Look, you don't have to tell me everything right now. Just eat, rest, and we'll figure things out." She nodded, her posture relaxing slightly. For the first time in weeks, she felt something unfamiliar settle over her, a tentative sense of trust. Ethan stood and moved to the counter, giving her space. As she finished the soup, her eyes lingered on the window, where the stars shone faintly through the curtains. Somewhere out there was her home, and while it felt impossibly far away, for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that she might survive long enough to find it again. The first light of dawn filtered through the sheer curtains, painting the small kitchen in muted gold. Ethan sat at the table, nursing a fresh cup of coffee. His eyes kept drifting toward the woman across from him. Naya cradled the mug he had given her the night before, her thin fingers gripping it tightly as though afraid it might vanish. The steam rose in soft spirals, momentarily distorting her alien features. She was still, her eyes distant, fixed on something far beyond the walls of his house. "You've been through a lot, haven't you?" Ethan said, breaking the silence. His voice was low, careful not to startle her. She tilted her head slightly, her lavender skin catching the sunlight. There was no response, only the faint tightening of her jaw. Ethan sighed and leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking beneath his weight. "I don't mean to pry, but if I'm going to help you, I need to know more. Anything. Where you're from, why you're here." Naya set the mug down gently. She hesitated, her luminous eyes flicking to his. "Far," she said, her voice soft but deliberate. "You said that last night." Ethan leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. "Far how? Another country? Another world?" Her gaze hardened slightly, the question sparking something in her. She raised a hand, gesturing toward the sky, her fingers tracing invisible patterns. Ethan followed the motion, understanding dawning on him. "You mean, out there?" She nodded, her expression guarded. There was no hesitation, no nervous laugh to indicate she was joking. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He had suspected, of course, her shimmering skin, her eyes that seemed too large, too knowing, but hearing her confirm it sent a shiver down his spine. "You're telling me you're not from Earth," he said, his voice quieter now. He wasn't sure if it was awe or fear creeping into his tone. "Yes," she replied simply. Her English was halting but clear, the syllables heavy in her mouth. Ethan let the word hang in the air, the weight of it sinking into the room. "All right," he said finally, exhaling deeply. "That's a lot to take in." Naya didn't respond. Instead, she looked toward the window, where the trees swayed gently in the morning breeze. Her gaze lingered, and Ethan wondered if she was seeing something he couldn't, if her thoughts were reaching across galaxies to the world she had left behind. "So, what happened?" he asked, his voice softer now. "Why are you here?" She hesitated again, her fingers twitching against the table. "Crash," she said after a long pause. "Ship broken." Ethan frowned. "Crash? Where?" Naya pointed to the distance, her hand trembling slightly. "Forest. Many days." Ethan tried to picture Ida's spacecraft, alien and advanced, hidden among the dense trees miles away. He imagined her wandering alone, injured, scavenging for food, avoiding anyone who might discover her. The thought sent a pang of guilt through him. She had been surviving barely, while he had been living in quiet comfort just miles away. "Did anyone see it? Your ship?" he asked. Naya's shoulders tensed. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Maybe. Heard sounds. Vehicles. People might be looking for you," Ethan said, his tone grim. "And not the good kind." Her gaze snapped back to him, wide and fearful. "No," she said firmly. "No find." Ethan raised a hand in reassurance. "Hey, I'm not saying they'll find you. I'm just saying we need to be careful. If someone spotted that crash, they're going to investigate." Naya's breathing quickened, her fragile composure cracking. "Danger," she murmured, almost to herself. Her hands clenched into fists, and Ethan could see the faint glow of her skin intensify, a subtle pulse beneath the surface. "Calm down," Ethan said gently, reaching across the table but stopping just short of touching her. "You're safe here. No one's going to find you, not unless we make it easy for them." Her eyes darted to his hand, then back to his face. The fear in her expression softened slightly, replaced by cautious trust. She nodded, her breathing slowing. "Good," Ethan said, leaning back. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to process everything. "All right, let's think this through. If your ship's broken, you're stuck here, right? There's no way for you to call home?" "Broken," she repeated, her voice tinged with sorrow. "No call." Ethan frowned. "So what happens now? You can't just hide forever." Her eyes dropped to the table, her shoulders slumping. "Don't know," she admitted. The vulnerability in her voice was striking, a reminder that despite her alien origins, She was just as lost and frightened as any human might be in her position. Ethan's mind raced. He had no idea how to fix a spacecraft or hide someone like her, but he couldn't send her back out there, not when she had no one else. "Okay," he said finally, his voice firm. "You can stay here for now. We'll figure it out." Naya looked up at him, surprise flickering across her face. "Why?" she asked, the words sharp and direct. Ethan shrugged. "Because you need help, and because I'm not going to let anyone hurt you." Her gaze lingered on him, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Thank you," she said, the words heavy with sincerity. Ethan stood, moving to the sink to rinse his cup. He needed a moment to breathe, to think. When he turned back, Naya was still watching him, her violet eyes filled with something he couldn't quite place gratitude. Yes, but also a deep, unspoken sadness. He sighed. "Look, I'll grab some supplies later. Food, clothes, whatever you need. For now, just try to rest." Naya nodded again, her hands clasping the edge of the table as though grounding herself. Ethan moved to the window, his gaze drifting to the forest in the distance. Somewhere out there, a broken ship lay hidden, and with it, the remnants of Naya's old life. Whatever had brought her to Earth, whatever had forced her into his home, was far from over. But for now, they had a fragile truce, a flicker of hope in the chaos. As the sunlight grew stronger, Ethan glanced back at Naya. She was staring out the window again, her eyes distant but calmer. For the first time, he realized how much was at stake, not just for her, but for both of them. He didn't know where this would lead, but one thing was certain: their lives would never be the same. The morning sun had risen higher, casting dappled patterns across the backyard as it filtered through the swaying branches of oak and maple trees. The scent of fresh earth and blooming wildflowers lingered in the air, carried on a gentle breeze that whispered through the grass. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed, watching as Naya crouched near the base of a tree. She seemed entranced by the simplest things: the texture of bark under her fingers, the way the grass bent beneath her knees, the intricate dance of sunlight against the dew. Her lavender skin shimmered faintly in the daylight, and for the first time, Ethan noticed how she seemed to draw energy from her surroundings. She radiated a quiet strength, despite the fear and uncertainty that had marked their earlier conversations. Her fingers brushed against a cluster of clover, her touch delicate, almost reverent. Ethan took a slow sip from his coffee, unsure whether to interrupt her moment of exploration. "You're fascinated by the grass," he said, his voice carrying across the yard. It wasn't a question, but more of an observation. Naya looked up, her wide violet eyes locking onto his. "It's soft," she said, the word halting but deliberate. She shifted slightly, running her fingers through the blades as if memorizing their texture. "Home doesn't have this." Ethan stepped off the porch, his boots crunching against the gravel path as he approached. "What does your home have?" he asked, keeping his tone light. He crouched down nearby, resting his elbows on his knees. Naya hesitated, her gaze dropping to the ground. "Rocks," she said after a pause. "Hard ground, cold." Ethan frowned. He had envisioned her home as some futuristic utopia, gleaming with advanced technology and alien marvels. The thought of a barren, inhospitable landscape clashed with everything he had imagined. "That sounds lonely," he said. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment she didn't respond. Then she nodded. "It is." The simplicity of her answer struck him. He wanted to ask more, to dig deeper into the life she had left behind. But something about the way her shoulders hunched told him she wasn't ready to share. Instead, he gestured toward a wooden bench, nestled in the shade of the trees. "Come on," he said. "Let's sit for a while." Naya followed him, her movements cautious but fluid, like a wild animal unsure of its surroundings. She sat at the edge of the bench, her hands resting lightly in her lap, her gaze scanning the horizon. Ethan watched her for a moment, noting the subtle tension in her frame, the way her head tilted slightly, as if listening for something beyond his hearing. "What is it?" he asked. "Noise," she said, her tone uneasy. "Far away. Strange." Ethan strained his ears, but all he could hear was the distant hum of a lawnmower and the occasional chirp of birds. What kind of noise? He pressed. Naya's brow furrowed. Low, she said. Steady. Like. She hesitated, then mimicked a faint, rumbling vibration with her voice. Engines? Ethan asked, his stomach tightening. She nodded, her expression darkening. Maybe. Ethan set his mug down on the ground, his thoughts racing. That's not good, he muttered. If someone's looking for you. Her head snapped toward him, her eyes wide with fear. No, she said firmly. They can't find me. Ethan raised a hand, trying to calm her. Relax. I'm not saying they will, but if they're near your crash site, they might start searching the area. We need to be ready. Naya's breathing quickened, her hands clenching into fists. The faint glow of her skin intensified, a subtle pulse beneath the surface that Ethan hadn't noticed before. He reached out, his hand hovering just above hers. Hey, he said softly, you're safe here. I'm not going to let anything happen to you. Her gaze dropped to his hand, and after a moment, she relaxed slightly. The glow dimmed, and her breathing steadied. She nodded, though the tension in her shoulders didn't fully dissipate. Ethan stood, scanning the tree line at the far edge of the yard. Wait here, he said. I'm going to check it out. No, Naya said sharply, standing as well. She reached out and grabbed his wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. Danger. Ethan met her gaze, his expression softening. I'll be careful, he promised. I just need to see what's out there. She hesitated, her fingers tightening briefly before she let go. Come back, she said, her voice quiet but firm. I will, he assured her. Ethan moved toward the trees, his steps light on the soft grass. As he neared the edge of the property, the faint rumbling sound reached his ears. It was low and rhythmic, barely audible over the rustle of leaves. He crouched behind a thick trunk, peering through the dense foliage. In the distance, he spotted Ida's sleek black vehicle parked near the forest's edge. Two figures stood beside it, their movements sharp and deliberate. They were dressed in dark uniforms, their faces obscured by helmets. One of them held a device that emitted a faint, pulsating glow, its purpose unclear. Ethan's pulse quickened. Whoever they were, they didn't look like locals. He watched as one of the figures scanned the area with the device, the other gesturing toward the forest. Their body language suggested urgency, as though they were following a lead. He retreated slowly, careful not to make a sound. When he reached the bench, Naya was pacing, her hands wringing together anxiously. She stopped when she saw him, her eyes searching his face. What did you see? She asked. Two people, Ethan said. Black uniforms. They've got some kind of scanner. I think they're looking for your ship. Naya's face paled, her shoulders trembling. We have to hide, she said, far away. Ethan shook his head. If we run now, they'll notice. We're safer staying out of sight until they leave. Her lips parted as if to argue, but she stopped herself. Instead, she nodded, her movements stiff and reluctant. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm but reassuring. We'll get through this, he said. I promise. She met his gaze, her expression filled with equal parts fear and trust. Okay, she said softly. They returned to the house, the door clicking shut behind them. Ethan pulled the curtains closed, casting the room into dim shadows. Naya sat by the window, her eyes fixed on the trees, as if willing the strangers to disappear. As the minutes stretched into hours, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The life he had known quiet, predictable, and solitary was gone. In its place was a storm of uncertainty, danger, and something he hadn't felt in a long time, purpose. Whatever came next, he wasn't facing it alone, and neither was she. The silence inside the house was suffocating. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, his hand wrapped around a now cold mug of coffee. His gaze flicked to the window, the curtains drawn tight, concealing them from whatever or whoever lurked in the distance. Across from him, Naya paced in slow, deliberate steps. Her movements were fluid, but her tension was palpable. Her glowing skin dimmed to a faint shimmer, reflecting her unease. Do you think they're still out there? Ethan asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. He wasn't sure why he spoke so softly. No one could hear them through the thick walls, but something about the situation demanded caution. Nia stopped mid-step, her head tilting slightly, as if listening to a sound only she could hear. "Gone," she said after a pause, but her tone carried little relief. "Far now." Ethan exhaled, setting the mug down. "For now, maybe. But they'll be back." They didn't seem like the type to give up easily. Naya's jaw tightened. She moved to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to peek outside. Her violet eyes scanned the tree line, every muscle in her body taut. Ethan watched her, his thoughts racing. He had no idea who those people were or how much danger they were in. All he knew was that keeping her safe would be far more complicated than he'd imagined. "You're certain they're after you?" he asked, leaning forward slightly. "Yes," Nia said, her voice clipped. She turned to face him, her expression hardened. "They come for me." Ethan studied her for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. "You think they know you're here?" She hesitated. "No, not yet, but they track." She gestured toward her chest, her fingers pressing lightly against her sternum. "Signal." Ethan's stomach twisted. "A signal? Like a beacon?" Naya nodded. "Not on purpose. Part of me." Ethan stared at her, the implications hitting him like a punch. "You mean they can track you? Anywhere?" "Yes," she said softly. Her shoulders sagged, the faint glow of her skin flickering like a dying ember. "Can't stop it." He pushed back his chair, standing abruptly. "Why didn't you tell me this earlier?" His tone wasn't angry, but the edge of panic was unmistakable. "I didn't know," she admitted, her voice trembling. "Didn't think it still worked." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, pacing the small kitchen. "All right, we need to figure this out. If they can track you, it's only a matter of time before they find us." Naya watched him, her hands clenching at her sides. "I'm sorry." Her words stopped him in his tracks. He turned to her, his expression softening. "It's not your fault," he said, his voice gentler now. "We'll figure it out, but we need to act fast." Naya nodded, her resolve returning. "Crash site," she said. "Part of ship, still there. Might help." Ethan frowned. "You think something there can stop the signal?" "Maybe," she said. "Need to see." The thought of going anywhere near the crash site made Ethan's pulse quicken, but they didn't have many options. If there was even a chance they could stop the signal, they had to try. "All right," he said. "We'll go at night. Less chance of running into anyone." Naya's lips pressed into a thin line, but she nodded. "Danger," she said. "But better than waiting." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan packed a small bag with supplies water, a flashlight, and the pistol he kept tucked away in a drawer. He hated the weight of it, but the possibility of needing it outweighed his discomfort. Nia stood by the door, her silhouette framed by the faint glow of the porch light. She had tied her hair back, her features sharp and determined. "You ready?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady. They stepped outside, the cool night air wrapping around them like a cloak. The forest loomed ahead, its dense canopy shrouding the path in shadow. Naya moved with quiet confidence, her bare feet barely making a sound against the ground. Ethan followed closely, his flashlight cutting a narrow beam through the darkness. "Are you sure this is the right way?" Ethan asked after a while. The forest seemed endless, its trees stretching toward the sky like silent sentinels. "Yes," Naya said without hesitation. She paused, her head tilting slightly as she listened. "Close." Ethan strained his ears but heard nothing, except the rustle of leaves in the wind. "How do you—" "Shh," Nia whispered sharply, her hand snapping up to silence him. Her glowing eyes narrowed, scanning the darkness ahead. Ethan froze, his grip tightening on the flashlight. A sound reached his ears, a faint, metallic clicking, like the hum of machinery just out of sight. His heart raced as the noise grew louder, accompanied by the crunch of boots on dry leaves. Naya grabbed his arm, pulling him into the cover of a nearby tree. Her breath was shallow, her glowing skin dimming until it blended almost seamlessly with the shadows. Ethan crouched beside her, his pulse pounding in his ears. Through the trees, a figure emerged. It wore a sleek, black uniform, its face obscured by a reflective visor. In its hand was a device that emitted a faint blue light, sweeping across the forest floor like a scanner. Ethan held his breath, his fingers brushing against the pistol in his bag. Naya's hand shot out, gripping his wrist tightly. She shook her head, her expression warning him to stay still. The figure paused, the scanner hovering for a moment before it moved on, disappearing deeper into the forest. When the sound of footsteps faded, Ethan exhaled shakily. "That was close," he whispered. "They're searching," Naya said, her voice barely audible. "But they don't know yet." Ethan swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Let's keep it that way." They pressed on, moving carefully to avoid making noise. The crash site came into view moments later, a jagged scar in the earth, surrounded by twisted metal and scorched trees. The remnants of Naya's ship glowed faintly in the moonlight, its alien surface smooth and seamless despite the damage. Naya moved toward it, her steps quick and purposeful. She knelt beside a piece of the wreckage, her fingers brushing against a small panel. The metal seemed to respond to her touch, shifting and opening to reveal a compartment. Inside was a cylindrical device, its surface etched with intricate patterns that pulsed faintly with light. "This," she said, holding it up, "can stop signal." Ethan stared at it, his chest tightening with a mix of hope and dread. "You're sure?" "Yes," Nia said firmly. "But we need time." Before Ethan could respond, a sharp crack echoed through the forest. A beam of light swept over them, and voices shouted in an unfamiliar language. Nia's eyes widened as she clutched the device to her chest. "Run," she said urgently. Ethan didn't hesitate. He grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the trees as the sound of pursuit grew louder. The forest blurred around them as they ran, the beams of light slicing through the darkness like searchlights. "We can't lead them back to the house," Ethan said, his breath ragged. "Go left," Naya panted, tugging him toward a denser cluster of trees. They veered off the path, the undergrowth clawing at their legs. The shouts grew fainter, but the threat was far from over. As they pressed deeper into the forest, Ethan realized they had crossed a line. There was no going back now. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The forest pressed in on them, thick with shadows and the scent of damp earth. The glow from Naya's skin, faint and pulsating, lit their way just enough to avoid stumbling over roots and jagged rocks. Ethan's lungs burned with every breath, his legs screaming in protest, but he didn't slow. Behind them, the distant hum of machinery and shouts of pursuit kept his adrenaline surging. Naya clutched the cylindrical device to her chest, her knuckles white against its smooth alien surface. Her pace matched Ethan's, her movements surprisingly swift and fluid despite her smaller frame. Every so often, her violet eyes darted toward him, ensuring he was still by her side. "We can't keep running like this," Ethan said between ragged breaths. "We need a plan." "Almost there," Nia replied, her voice steady despite their situation. She veered sharply to the right, guiding him toward a cluster of massive trees whose intertwining branches formed a natural canopy. Beneath their dense cover, the moonlight barely penetrated, leaving them shrouded in near darkness. Ethan dropped to his knees, gripping a tree trunk for support as he struggled to catch his breath. "Where are we going?" he asked, his voice low but urgent. Naya knelt beside him, her glowing skin dimming further as she scanned their surroundings. "We hide," she said. "Then use this." She held up the device, its intricate patterns glowing faintly. "What is it?" Ethan asked, his gaze fixed on the alien object. "A disruptor," Naya explained. "Blocks signal, confuses trackers." Ethan nodded, though the term was unfamiliar. "How long will it take?" "A few minutes," she said, her tone grim. "But it's loud. They will know." He ran a hand through his sweat-soaked hair, weighing their options. "So we have to fight them off while it works?" "Yes," Naya said, her eyes meeting his. "If we don't, they will take me." Ethan's jaw tightened. "That's not going to happen." She blinked, her expression softening briefly before hardening again. "I need your help." "You have it," Ethan said without hesitation. He reached into his bag, pulling out the pistol he had brought. Its weight felt foreign and uncomfortable in his hand, but he forced himself to steady his grip. "I'm not letting them take you." Naya nodded, then pressed the device against the ground. She twisted its base, and a low hum began to emanate from within. The patterns along its surface glowed brighter, casting eerie shadows across their faces. "They'll hear that," Ethan said, his voice tense. "Good." Nia replied, rising to her feet. It will bring them. Ethan frowned. That's not what I meant. Before he could argue further, the hum grew louder, the vibrations rippling through the ground like the warning growl of a storm. Ethan's heart pounded as he adjusted his grip on the pistol, his eyes scanning the darkness. Nia stood beside him, her posture rigid, her glowing skin casting faint light across the undergrowth. The first sign of their pursuers came in the form of flickering beams of light cutting through the trees. Ethan could hear them now, sharp, clipped voices speaking in a language he didn't understand. The figures moved with precision, their dark uniforms blending seamlessly into the shadows. Stay close, Ethan whispered, positioning himself between Nia and the approaching threat. They are trained, Nia said, her voice low. Strong. So are we, Ethan said, though he doubted his words even as he spoke them. His hands trembled slightly, but he forced himself to stay calm. A branch snapped nearby, and one of the figures emerged from the shadows, their visor glinting in the faint light. Ethan raised the pistol, his finger hovering over the trigger. The figure froze, their scanner sweeping the area before landing on Nia. Run, Ethan shouted, firing a shot into the ground near the figure's feet. The sound echoed through the forest, sending birds scattering into the night. The figure recoiled, then shouted something to their companions. Nia didn't move. No, she said firmly. We fight. Another figure appeared, this one moving faster, their scanner flashing wildly. Ethan fired again, this time hitting the scanner directly. Sparks flew as the device shattered, and the figure stumbled back with a curse. Nia raised her hand, and Ethan caught a glimpse of something he hadn't seen before. Her skin glowed brighter, the light pulsing outward in rhythmic waves. The nearest figure faltered, clutching their head as though in pain. What was that? Ethan asked, his voice filled with both awe and confusion. Energy pulse, Nia said. Only stuns. Won't last. Ethan nodded, firing another shot to keep the other figures at bay. The disruptor's hum grew louder, its vibrations intensifying. He glanced at Nia. How much longer? Almost ready, she said, her gaze fixed on the glowing device. The remaining figures regrouped, their movements more cautious now. One of them pulled out a strange gun-like weapon, its barrel glowing with a faint blue light. Ethan barely had time to react before a beam of energy shot past him, scorching the tree behind him. Great, he muttered, ducking behind the trunk. They've got ray guns. They won't stop, Nia said, her voice steady. We must finish this. Ethan gritted his teeth and fired another shot, aiming for the weapon. The bullet struck its mark, and the weapon exploded in the figure's hands, sending them sprawling to the ground. A small victory, but he knew it wouldn't last. The disruptor emitted a high-pitched whine, and Nia's expression shifted. Done, she said. Signal gone. Ethan didn't have time to celebrate. The remaining figures advanced, their movements more aggressive now. We need to move, he said. Now. Nia grabbed the disruptor, her glowing skin dimming once more. This way, she said, leading him deeper into the forest. They ran, their steps barely audible against the soft earth. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter, but Ethan knew they weren't safe yet. They needed distance, a place to regroup. Finally, they emerged into a small clearing, the moonlight bathing them in silver. Nia stopped, her breathing labored but steady. She placed the disruptor on the ground, her hands trembling slightly. Ethan turned to her, his own breath ragged. You all right? Yes, she said, though her voice carried the weight of exhaustion. He nodded, glancing back toward the forest. They'll keep coming, won't they? Yes, she admitted, but the signal is gone, harder to find me now. Ethan ran a hand over his face, the reality of their situation settling over him. We can't keep running forever. No, Nia said, her gaze steady. We must fight. Not just them, but what they stand for. Ethan frowned. What do you mean? She hesitated, then looked up at him, her expression resolute. They are not the only ones. Others will come. For me. For Earth. The weight of her words hit him like a blow. He had thought their struggle was about survival, about keeping her safe. But now he realized it was something much larger, something that could change everything. Ethan straightened, his resolve hardening. Then we'll fight, he said. together. Nia nodded, her glowing skin brightening slightly, a faint smile touching her lips. Despite everything, there was hope, and for the first time, Ethan felt ready to face whatever came next.